It was a time around the 1940s. World War II was going on, yet in such a desperate time where people need each other, blacks were still not treated with equality. Once enough support came for the creation of black flight schools for the military, a group of prominent and determined African Americans rose to become U.S. military pilots. They were known as Tuskegee Airmen. These men sought to defy white superiority and prove that they were just as skilled and just as capable of doing whatever a white man could do, all the while doing their part for their country during the war. The Airmen became one of the best fighter groups the nation has ever known, fighting the two wars for their country and for themselves. Around the time before World War II, blacks were segregated from whites and there was no social equality. Blacks were considered to be mentally inferior to whites, and when America entered World War II, newspapers and whites everywhere were claiming that blacks were incapable of flying airplanes and should therefore not be allowed to fly airplanes. Lee Archer, a former Tuskegee Airman and only one to ever become an ace, said their reasoning was that blacks didn't have the durability or dexterity to operate an aircraft. Because of black performance during World War I, even though training and opportunity was limited, African Americans were brought down even further, making their reputation worse and their opportunities minimal. A major factor that burned this form of white superiority into the minds of people was a study done by the 1925 War College. The college said that blacks are mentally inferior by nature subservient cowards and are unfit for combat. These sayings and beliefs engraved into the white minds gave blacks little to no chance of ever receiving equality or having the opportunity to become a part of the Army Air Force. That is, until the black press came into play. The black press revealed and told stories to African Americans of their community within their newspapers that whites neglected to put into their own papers. Containing these papers was small victories in aviation for blacks, like in 1926 when Bessie Coleman became the first black female ever to become a pilot. Stories like that inspired many blacks to fight for their rights to fly and brought pressure to the president to do something. The black press continued to write inspirational stories that stirred out the black community, but soon they got sick of the small victories. They wanted to acquire a big victory, so they dubbed the Double V campaign. The goal of the campaign was to receive a victory at home with obtaining racial equality and to receive another victory by having a part in the war and winning it. To do this, they continued pressure on the U.S. government and President Roosevelt until finally President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802, which allowed blacks to be issued into the military and set a bar for how they were to be treated once in the military. An add-on to the treatment of African Americans came from the War Department pamphlet of 1944. Whites were also told to give African Americans the respect they deserved, but that rule was worked around by many as the military was still segregated with all white and all black groups or units. Whites were not too happy with the order, but the event still led to the creation of flight schools to train African American pilots. The biggest of these schools was Tuskegee Institute. These schools attracted thousands of African American men to become pilots. Those attracted included former Tuskegee Airman Roscoe Brown, who said that the men carried with them dreams of breaking barriers and learning to fly. The men brought physically with them all their skills and intellect, and mentally all of their family and communities they lived in. The journey was not easy though, as the men were to pass through ridiculous examinations and tests that dubbed many to be unfit for combat. The requirements needed to become a pilot made thousands of soon-to-be pilots only hundreds of soon-to-be pilots. For those that passed and made it into the schools, they became a part of the program at Moton Airfield to see if African Americans were capable of flying an airplane. Those pilots did exceptionally well, but in order to continue on with the program and have a more advanced combat training, they needed something more to gain white support. In 1941, they got that something when First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt decided to ride with one of the first airmen, Charles Alfred Anderson, aka the Chief. The flight went well and was widely publicized, and clearly showed that African Americans could be just as good a pilot as a white man. The first graduating class of pilots from the Tuskegee base was only 5 pilots strong, and they received the coveted Army Air Corps wings. For these pilots that had outlasted the rigorous tests and the attempts to break their spirit, receiving these wings was truly a magical moment. The original graduating class combined with subsequent graduating classes and formed the 99th Fighter Pursuit Squadron. After graduating in 1942, the 99th first saw action in 1943 in Africa with the 12th Air Force. Now action is a loose term. The Red Tails, as they were also known as, saw little combat and they were given the hand-me-down targets.
Some of the military brass just wanted to make them disappear. There were officers in the military that didn't want the Tuskegee Airmen project to succeed. There were even false accounts of information given to the press about unsatisfactory African-American performance.
We've done every low-down, dirty job you've handed us.
You have not assigned us a single forward mission.
You're just gonna have to suffer a failure.
We have a right to fight for our country, the same as every other American. So you shut us down, or you let us fly.
So finally, in Operation Shingle, which was the Battle of Anzio, the Red Tails were given an opportunity to prove themselves. They did not disappoint. In a quote from James Goodwin, "We tore up the Luftwaffe at Anzio, and you can't help but think what the Luftwaffe stood for at a time. And now, here come the Tuskegee Airmen." The mighty German Luftwaffe shot down in flames by African-American pilots, the same pilots that were, in the words of the Army War College Board, inherently weak in character and mentally inferior. After Anzio, the Red Tails gained more pilots from graduating classes. All of these pilots came together to form the 332nd Fighter Group. The 332nd Fighter Group was given a major role in combat after their impressive numbers at Anzio. The Red Tails were ordered to do bomber escort missions. The bomber escort missions previously belonged to the white units, but the bombers were receiving heavy losses due to enemy aircraft, so the Red Tails received another opportunity to prove themselves. Just like Anzio, they did so well that they were even requested by white units, despite the color of their skin. These pilots had extreme skill and were the first unit to shoot down the German jet fighter, an Me-262. They also recorded the longest mission ever flown, which was the first mission to bomb Berlin. The bomber pilots pleaded with the military brass to have the Tuskegee Airmen protect them in Berlin, but from a propaganda point of view, the generals didn't want African-American pilots on the first mission to Berlin. Apparently, it just wasn't meant to be, because the other fighter squadron that was supposed to take over for them didn't show up, so the 332nd Fighter Group was the first American fighter pilot unit to go to Berlin. After the constant bombing of German supplies and factories, the Luftwaffe was a mere shell of its former self, and the German army was never able to reinforce its once mighty army. There were occasional sightings of German aircraft, but the Allied fighter squadrons took care of them easily. These Tuskegee Airmen performed so well that there are even rumors that they claim to have never lost a bomber. The Tuskegee Airmen fought two wars, one against an enemy force overseas, and another war against racism and bigotry at home. As we mentioned previously, this is the Double V, an initiative to crush fascism in Europe and end racism in America. In relation to the Double V, the Tuskegee Airmen combined with other Allied forces were able to neutralize the Axis threat in Europe, and were able to return home victorious. All African Americans returned home to discover that they left America in a segregated era, and when they returned, nothing had changed. Despite all their prolific achievements, the Tuskegee Airmen experienced segregation the second they got down the gangplank off the ship. After the war, due to the success of the African Americans in combat, President Harry Truman enacted Executive Order 9981, which led to direct equality of treatment and opportunity for all of the American military. This order then led to the end of racial segregation in the military when it was integrated in 1948 due to this executive order. The integration of the American military forces was a key stepping stone to further civil rights in America. The Tuskegee Airmen had an incredibly distinguished service record, such as receiving the Presidential Unit Citation, which was the highest award that could be given to an American unit, and having nearly 100 distinguished flying medals. Their courageous actions and their ability to stand up for what they believed in set the stage for racial integration in other areas of American society. The courageous pilots changed the perception on blacks forever, leaving a lasting impact on the military and all the people that they encountered.